Through more than 2 decades at Kenner and Hasbro, Aaron built worlds, told stories, and designed toys for some of pop culture's biggest names, including Transformers, Batman, Star Wars, and more. Join him as he explores the archives and tells you the stories of the creative process behind your favorite toys. This is the Toy Armada with your host, Aaron Archer.
So we are back again for another Toy Armada with your host, Aaron Archer, and I'm your co-host, Protoman. And we're going to jump again into the Transformers Armada library of product. It seems that it was very well received by the listeners for the podcast, and I guess we're just going to go into a whole bunch of other different characters and products. We have a little bit of a mix here today, a little bit of everything from Transformers Armada, some early Transformers Armada, some repaint stuff, some combiners, some, I guess we'll call it Christmas product or mid-wave kind of product. We have some role-play items, a little bit of everything, and Aaron's going to break it down here. And speaking about Aaron, how you doing, Aaron?
I am great today. How you doing?
Awesome stuff. So we had some really good reception. We cracked past 1,000 subscribers with the podcast, so that's really good. Everything's looking awesome. Even all our individual segments are now past 1,000 views, so that's a milestone for the Toy Armada podcast. And we're going to jump into some more Armada. So the first one we're going to cover here, and this is some early Armada, really a prime example of how things kind of changed with how you wanted to tackle the Minicon gimmick and how it's being used with the bulk figures. We're going to talk about Transformers Armada Deluxe Class Ironhide, as he was called in Micron, but he was called here Demolisher with Blackout. So this is an example of something that was an early, development Armada character and how it interacts with its Minicon, because how we would see how Minicons being used with later product was very simple. Attach the Minicon, activates a gimmick, and that's that. With this one, there was a lot of multi-level compatibility with the Blackout Minicon with Demolisher, the actual bulk figure. How did that go about?
Those were those early days where we were trying to figure out how integrated a Minicon was going to be. Ideally, I think there are a few of them that you can see that they kind of sit inside their partner.
Mm-hmm.
That is something we wanted to do and had hoped to do more of the cockpit attitude. But that just became a little tricky to do depending on the vehicle type and whatnot. So his Minicon totally has that gunner seat, which then plays up the missiles. That kind of accentuated that whole feature. And then he would jump out and fire the missiles, I guess. So that was all early. Kind of how would you get a Minicon to help a bigger guy? And in this case, well, you get him sitting in the gunner station.
Yeah, and especially, again, when you look at Blackout, the Minicon himself, he's almost like a miniature version of Demolisher in a lot of ways, too. Like, even his alt mode itself is kind of like a miniature version of him. He has, again, like you mentioned, the ability to sit in kind of this seat that makes him kind of like this turret, which adds another kind of play value to it. And then, of course, the launching of the missiles being another play feature. A lot again, like it's almost like you guys were just trying in the early points, trying to figure out how is this play pattern going to work. And again, you see that also, like we mentioned before, with Cyclonus and with Hotshot, where there was always there was the unlocking element by attaching the Minicon, which would unlock some kind of feature, and then an extra element of a play feature, whether it be being a propeller for Hotshot or being stored on the front of the helicopter with Cyclonus, and in this case, being a gunner member. Very weird. Very weird. Very weird. The design choices, having an eye patch and everything like that, the veneering detail. What was the inspiration for that?
So when he was presented, he was clearly this kind of missile tank. Whether that was inspired by, and this was the Takara kind of concept art, and I think a really rough, just glued together kind of kit bashed concept of what this feature could be. The original feature actually had the Minicon kind of going into the chest from the back, kind of inhabiting his torso area a little bit differently, at least the original Takara concept. We always wanted to get back to that, and we never did quite get there. The movie One Wave item that isn't in the movie, the white APC kind of military camoed thing, that got a similar feature to what was originally pitched for Demolisher, kind of a push through the back, revealing a center gun. But that feature got changed. But he was always this military concept.
For people that aren't aware, what would become Wreckage later?
Yeah, Wreckage. Which was actually a character they designed in the art department, but never made it past the art department. So we made a figure of it. So it's kind of like a movie figure that wasn't in the movie, but wasn't made by Hasbro either. I digress. That's a future podcast. But he was an early one, so those were in tandem. So it was always Cyclonus and Demolisher. I was really into creating unique heads for these characters. Red Alert has a particular visor style head, RoboCop style.
Very RoboCop, yeah.
Demolisher here has this kind of has this tactical targeting thing over his eye that looks like a patch. In my mind, he was always kind of a pirate type character, and you would say his name like Demolishor. More so than any other way to say it. But that was just my headcanon kind of thought process about it. And in my mind, he is a Afrocentric character.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I know that sounds strange on robots, but his face proportions and tone and everything, for a robot, it would be trying to be representative.
Interesting. There's quite a few. Friend of the podcast. Friend of the podcast, Jaws D, Afrocentric Transformer fan.
No doubt.
We've always had those discussions. Like, he always felt like, like certain characters exuded that, and
sure.
Tigatron, Rhinox, certain ones, even if they were played by white actors, you know what I mean? Like Richard Newman for Tigatron, for Rhinox. And I never picked up on that one. I'm going to be sure to run that by him. But
yeah, so that's a subtle one. Yeah.
Another thing too that was also mentioned here was at some point you guys were going to do like repaints of him, and you guys you were going to do a repaint, because obviously you would go into the Power Links repaints. This mold would see quite a few repaints throughout its lifetime. Like, I'm trying to just see here, 1, 2, 3, like 4 different repaints. And at one point you were going for, like, it says here, according to Aaron Archer, originally intended to color this figure to look like Six Shot, because of Demolisher's gun hands reminded him of Six Shot. That's what it says here, exact quote. But ultimately went with the red and white and with blue accent color scheme for the Power Links repaint. Anything you remember of that?
I think I looked at that, but it was pretty out there. I mean, Six Shot is also a lot like Buzz Lightyear, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of teals and whites and stuff.
Purples and whites. So I didn't go too far with that. The Energon colorization, I remember more particularly trying to be a little more tactical with the Devastator Echo.
Yeah, the Energon repaint, which was a KB Toys exclusive. That one, you could see it has a lot more of that Devastator kind of. Also a little bit, if anything, that's the one that's closer to Six Shot, if you were definitely trying to revisit that idea.
Yeah.
I find that the Power Links...
The red one's kind of weird, yeah.
Well, I find that the red one, if anything, maybe... I don't know who decided those colors ultimately in the end, but I think it might have been also influenced by his Japanese name, which was Ironhide. So maybe because Ironhide, the whites with the reds... obviously, the blues are kind of the weird part of it, but maybe that's what it could be. Also, the influences of that. It's a possibility. And again, also later on, he would then get a repaint in the Cybertron line, bringing that mold all the way up to the Cybertron line, where the Minicon was left out of the package, if you will, but instead included a Cyber Planet key that was retooled to have a Minicon port on that. So when they're leaving out the Minicon, are they just, it's on the mold and they're just throwing away the plastic, or at this point now? Okay, so that was the case. So they didn't just...
The technical term is we're just scrapping those parts. So
okay, that's what I was because I was like, okay,
or perhaps one thing you can do from a technological standpoint, manufacturing standpoint, is create little walls, if you will, in the flow of the molds, so that you gate them up, so that the plastic can't get to that aspect of the mold through the little...
That's what I wanted to ask, if they walled it out.
So there's a possibility they did that, and probably that's as likely as scrapping the material, depending on how big a volume that item may have saw. Scrapping a lot is just, ideally not what you do. So hard to say, but it could have been gated up. We've never seen loose ones anywhere. So,
and while we're going to discuss this in the future, also, that Cyber Planet key that's included with him, that's all separately manufactured, I would imagine.
Yeah.
All of that. Yeah. Was that the case with all the Cybertron figures, or just in this individual case here? Because they don't share any colors with anybody. I mean, every Cyber Planet key is just a translucent.
No, I think I think the Cyber Planet keys themselves were gang molded, and then put with the individual toys. Because they had the codes that had to go on them. Different ones obviously got different color treatments.
Because
so
they each
that was its own big, its own thing.
Because in relation to this one here, it's because you have I guess we could say the 5 different toolings for the Cyber Planet keys, each related to their planets or whatever, and then you got this one that it's the Cybertron tooling. And it has that little Minicon port that's tooled into the activation area, so that's a whole different tooling in itself. So I'm just kind of curious that whole process of how that would have come about. If there's some giant mold of Cyber Planet keys, and there's just ones that also have Minicon ports on them.
Well, they would have made a mold with the Minicon ports, and then molded all those up and split them amongst those items that needed that key.
Interesting.
You know what I'm saying? So there was more than just the Demolisher, right, that had that feature.
Yeah, I think it was with they did it also with the Optimus. They did it with, I'm trying to remember some. They did.
So they would have made its own mold for that key, and spread it out. Yeah.
So again, with this character, again he'd be a mainstay in the show up until the end of the Energon series. Again, popular character with a lot of people. They haven't really updated him yet, but I would not be surprised at some point if he does show up again, because his trademark is always kept alive throughout the years. The big funny thing to note about all of this was with this Demolisher release it was the first time since 1990 that the Blackout trademark was used. The movie character that we all associate with that trademark today really kind of was revitalized with this 2002 product here within Transformers Armada. Blackout as a trademark was originally a Micromaster character from 1990 that was one half of a Micromaster Combiner. It was a jet. And then was used here as a Minicon character. I guess keeping that, Micromaster, now it's a Minicon. And then later on, Blackout would be used as a helicopter in that trademark for Energon. And then would find its way to 2007, where when people think Blackout in Transformers today, they think of that movie character and everything associated with it. So it's just fun to note that in a lot of ways that trademark revitalized itself here with this Armada character as a Minicon with Demolisher.
Yep, those are those early days where I was just going through those books and names that sounded good, that two-word kind of commentary type names, Blackout, they're just great, right? And Hasbro owns apparently 90% of those kind of words, because I hear often from partners and animation developers that every time they go to look up names and secure them, that Hasbro already owns them.
Yeah. All those trademarked names, man, are...
Yeah, and so a name like Blackout or Demolisher, I mean, geez, you know, how many properties could use two names like that, you know? So having them maintained all these years is really good.
And we're going to segue to the next one here. Speaking of a Blackout, let's talk about a black repaint. This was a product that came later in Armada's lifespan. One of the more popular products, and again, a popular idea that would definitely be used a million times over across both Hasbro and Takar's use of the Transformer brand, the black repaint. And we have here today, we're going to be talking about Transformers Armada Deluxe Class Nemesis Prime with Run Over. Two things first to just cover off the bat here. The use of Nemesis Prime. This is the first time that we're seeing the use of that. Prior to that, you guys used a black repaint Scourge. Used that name to apply to it. Japan always used like Black Convoy. That was just kind of their go-to. And the clever use of the character, because you had his little Minicon partner that was a jet named Overrun. You guys instead just flipped it around, and now it's Run Over. So... yeah, pretty interesting there. So what do you remember about this guy? Again, it was a black repaint of the deluxe class Armada Optimus Prime, a cheaper price point item that didn't have the trailer, just the base robot itself with a punching gimmick. What do you remember about deciding to do black repaints? Again, at this point in 2003, black repaints were not just a common go-to for a Optimus Prime mold. It literally up to that point you had the RAD Car Robots character of Scourge, you had the G1 Japan exclusive black repaint, and probably around this time too, maybe the Masterpiece was being considered for a black repaint. And then you got this guy here.
Yeah.
So, have at it.
So, I mean, the first Optimus was so good that, you know, it would be a shame not to redeco it, so that's just first and foremost. But coming out of RID with the Scourge item, that whole concept of a Bizarro Optimus or negative leaning Optimus or reverse Optimus, however you want to see that character, you know, it stuck with me. I thought that I kind of like black and teal together and silver, so that Scourge item was in my mind. So when we tried to figure out how we could incorporate a color change within the show for Optimus that was compelling, we kind of hit upon the negative Optimus. And you're right, Takara called it Black Convoy. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Well,
this specific version has a kind of a loopy Japanese name, but that's because they used it as a magazine giveaway, the Lucky Draws.
Yeah.
But historically, up to that point, if it's a Black Optimus repaint, they just called it Black Convoy, just for the simplicity.
Yeah, so
but on the Western side, it was like, well, we can't call him Black Convoy. So
yeah. So Nemesis Prime is, you know, just our way of saying Black Convoy.
Yeah.
And so that's how the name kind of changed. In my head canon, I tend to think that you know, Nemesis Prime is something that happens to a Prime. But I don't know where the name Scourge goes all the time anymore.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
Does his name change to Scourge when he's in this possessed mode or something? Like he's Locutus instead of Picard, you know? Like his name changes because he's inhabiting some different, you know, character. So that part I don't know, but I hate the idea that Scourge is left to the side, because to me they're both somewhat connected. So it is Nemesis Prime Scourge, even though it's in Armada, in my mind.
Yeah, and again, it's really, it's funny because the way that Hasbro kind of handles it now is Scourge as a trademark is really applied to that sweep character from the 86 movie, and they're more going, unless we're doing a direct homage to that RED character, which is that laser Optimus Prime long-nosed truck, they usually go with Nemesis Prime now. because it's also a way not to confuse the IPs, because there's Nemesis Prime, Black Optimus Prime repaint. Scourge, ooh, you fall into a territory of a bunch of different characters within Transformers, and for the sake of business, it's easier to just kind of not confuse people. Oh, we're gonna name 12 characters Darth Vader. It's like, you don't want to do that. So it's just kind of easier that way. So again, because this black repaint in Japan was a TV magazine exclusive, limited to 5,000 pieces sent out, and they decided to call it Scourge just as an homage to what the Westerners were doing with the Black Convoy brand for car robots as robots in disguise in 2000 and 2001. Again, the choice of the Minicon here, because at some point we're probably going to discuss the vanilla repaint, the vanilla paint scheme of this, but the Minicon included with it, the little jet here, who, by the way, never appeared in the show. This was a exclusive to the toy line character and was used a little bit in the Dreamwave comic books. And I think he made a cameo in the intro of the Japanese version. But how did that come about? Do you remember anything?
Just turning the name upside down.
Pretty much.
I often talk about how the toy business can be very fast and kind of you make decisions and get this stuff going. We probably didn't, when we decided to do a redeco, it was probably because the original Prime was doing so well, although it was built into the animation, so I know we were going to do a redeco. But clearly we probably did that for speed and just said, well, we run Overrun we own, so it stands a good chance we'll get run over from the copyright, and it'll be fast and we won't have to do a lot of extra crazy. So that's the only thing I can think of. That was just us being somewhat expedient with a short time kind of gig, like, okay, what are we going to do here? And we probably just came up with that. We thought it was funny and we went with it.
There was rumors that were kicking around back in 2002. So when you did Megatron, you had his Minicon. It was called Leader 1, just in name, not in design. When you have this character here, now he also has a Minicon with him, and he has a very Leader 1 kind of look to him. Was that intentional or just coincidence and the fans just reading into it?
Yeah, I think that was coincidence based on the fact that we did want to give him his Minicon a gun. Make it a weapon, and I think that created that plain bullet head vibe that is there, and even also the way the eyes were colored on it too. It's very similar. It's yeah. Funny. I don't think that was ever intentional.
Okay, just wanted to make sure with that. And again, you mentioned it's one of those Minicons that it has an alt mode, it has a robot mode, it has also a third mode, which is a gun. It unlocks a punch feature. This mold would then, of course, be repainted in other stuff throughout the years, an Ultra Magnus repaint. It would, again, much like we mentioned with the Demolisher, would find its way to the Cybertron line. It would have its Minicon removed, and then instead a Cyber Planet key with a Minicon port put on instead. Again, popular mold, nice little figure. One of the early examples of, again, making a affordable version of a leader character, where that was slowly starting with Beast Machines, where you were creating multiple price points for the same characters. Because one of these, I don't want to say it was a hard and fast rule with Transformers, but usually it was one toy for one character and that's it. And whatever that price point was, that was it. Back in, let's go all the way back to G1, Soundwave got his one toy and that was it. If he did get a second toy, it's because he had some kind of body change or whatever. Now he's an action master. Now he's this. And even with Beast Wars, it's you get the one Cheetor toy and that's it. If you get another Cheetor toy, it's because now he's a Transmetal. Now he's a Transmetal 2. Beast Machines kind of started this, oh, hey, Cheetor's popular. Let's do Supreme Class. Let's do Night Attack, which really was, they did a black repaint of it, but it's something where they were giving multiple price points. When you got into Robots in Disguise, Now it's like you have the big Optimus, but you also have the Spy Changer price point. So people have options where, you know, if you can't afford that big leader class-esque figure, you could get that more cheaper Spy Changer price point. When we go into Armada, we didn't see any of that. Every character just got their one figure, and that's it, and they stayed within their price points. When we enter here with Armada, there at least was with the Optimus. Optimus had his big whatever leader class figure, and then he has this deluxe class one. Was that a choice because they wanted to have a smaller Optimus figure so people could afford it, or just, you know, we wanted to have an Optimus figure and we figured there could be a ton of repaints from it later?
Yeah. Simple question that you stumbled into a much bigger issue. Transformers, like you say, traditionally has been or had been one for one. These are the characters. This one's expensive. This one's affordable. You know, there was no rhyme or reason that Bumblebee, a main character, was like the cheapest form that you could buy, much less Optimus being one of the middle ones instead of the higher end ones, right? Mm-hmm. So it very much functioned in the 80s as a representation of the brand and the show and the toys, and that's what it was. Mostly because they came from Japan, and that's how Japan did it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm coming from a team that is cutting its teeth and innovating segmentation on Batman. We know that this is the late 90s where we're trying to figure out some bigger kid play patterns and thought processes. So we know, you know, the main characters are more important than just endlessly creating new characters. We were seeing this in Beast Wars where, you know, the guys that were in the show clearly are going to be most popular, and then great forms and opportunity redecos and things are also going to be popular, but maybe you stretch too far when you try to make a Mosquito and things like this.
Yeah.
So maybe we should have done another Cheetor instead. You know, you start to think, why did we even go down that road? So that permeates the thought process going forward. Transformers doesn't fit into this conventional line. We're going to get into it soon, but, you know, there's no role play. There's not, there's no human component to kind of turn the kid into something easily, at least at that time. Mm-hmm. The Transformers were Transformers. Right, we weren't in an era where you could make PVC Transformers or statue Transformers or limited.
We were entering that era.
Yeah, we were entering that era, but this time, so this is what I did for years, was push this boundary. Okay, like a big wave, getting it away from just being the single character that transforms, that comes from Japan, that is based on a show. And if you watch the show, you'll love the toy. And if you didn't, well, maybe you'll never know about the toy. Or if you love puzzles, you know, it was a different model back then. And we were pushing it towards the modern model, more that I'm familiar with Star Wars, with Batman, with modern toys. So, yes, very tactical to go, how do we make the most out of our main characters? How do we redeco them in ways that are meaningful? So, you know, if Optimus is a big deal, his negative would be a big deal, or interesting at least, versus some random new guy, was the thought process. You saw that with Beast Machines, where we did the big Cheetor and the little Cheetor, to try to start highlighting main characters. I don't know if it worked as well with that Cheetor.
It was a rough year, Beast Machines, for Transformers.
Yeah, no doubt. But
that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, but that was the same process, right? Trying to do more with your main characters so that, you know, that's the heavy lifting. You've introduced these characters to your audience. They know their stories. They know their attitudes. They kind of like them. Here's a lot of different ways you can engage them. You know, at that time, it was still very limited. So this is, you know, this is the changing of the brand that I was doing. Because there was a very literal sense, even with Beast Wars and stuff, where, you know, we had to come up with a whole new gimmick for a reason to redo a different guy, right? We had to have Transmetals 2, and Fusors and stuff like that.
And at the time, the only way a kid could engage with an Optimus Primal character was at the time, the most expensive price point, the Ultra Class, where there was
Yeah.
no Optimus Primal that was a deluxe or a basic, and
Yep.
they couldn't
So-
engage that character.
So you tap into another reason that would be advantageous to put into the line. It'd been traditionally you put your high-end, most important characters, the leaders, in the highest price point or a higher price point, so that you guarantee, a certain level of sale, I guess, or you're putting your best foot forward, because you certainly don't want to have a high-end rando. Mm-hmm. So that would be even worse. So this was an opportunity where we were also, as co-development goes, trying to get more global, trying to expand the reach of just Transformers being in England, Japan, Italy, in America, a little bit of Mexico, a little bit of Canada, obviously, North America, let's call it. But there were still parts of the globe that couldn't engage with Transformers. The price points weren't right, the scales weren't right, the various things. So what that Optimus originally did, and would continue to do until the molds literally fell apart, was offer a more affordable leader character that is the primary character in the animation. So that was a very important step in this whole process, to get Optimus at a $10 or under price point. In a meaningful
now
way.
that you mention it too, this specific mold, I'm a big bootleg collector. That one got bootlegged a lot. So clearly, having something that was an Optimus Prime, but it was much more smaller and simpler to bootleg, as opposed to, let's say, a lot of bootleggers. I mean, there is exceptions to the rules. I own a Primus bootleg, which is it's crazy just to look at it. But usually bootleggers like to do stuff that's a little more smaller and simpler for manufacturing reasons. Obviously, it has to be done on
that one's a very intuitive, easy transformation. It's as straightforward as you can get.
And yet it invokes a very important character, so
does
exactly what it needs to do.
Yeah, that tooling was important. And a good conversation to have as we talk about other stuff.
Well, the last thing I just want to cover with this before we move on to the next one is the veneering detail on the inside of his chest. So with the larger Armada Optimus Prime, you obviously put a matrix of leadership in there. This one, there is no matrix of leadership. Was that intentional? Were you the one behind the tooling for this one, or the veneering?
Yeah. So our idea was there that we had already done it for the super build part of the torso, and I think my thought process at the time. Remember, this is early days. I don't know everything. Future me would know. I was like, well, maybe he's this little guy, and when he puts the matrix in his chest, that's when he becomes super. So the little guy wouldn't have the matrix just sitting there, or maybe he hasn't earned it yet, or some
other storytelling element.
Yeah, just some other, and you noticed it, right? That it wasn't there. So that was the point. That
Well, back then when the fans
point.
got the figure, there was this speculation where, at some point is Optimus going to lose the Matrix or something, and that actually does come up in the show, where there's this thing where the Matrix isn't with him anymore, it's not in his chest. You actually see it in one of the final frames of the cartoon, too, where you see his chest open and the Matrix isn't in there. It was a storytelling element that I guess at some point the animation studio interplayed with the toy and everything like that. But I don't know if it was, it's like chicken before the egg. Was that something the animation studio planned and then you implicated into the toy, or you put it into the toy and then the animation studio was like, oh, hey, do you notice the Matrix isn't there? So it's interesting.
Yeah, that could have been a liaison with Takara. They could have seen the item, obviously, and just incorporated that. Tough for me to know on that one.
Cool. So next we're going to cover, and this is a fun one, because we noticed that last time while we were talking about Minicons because of their relation to their bulk figures, we didn't really talk extensively about an individual Minicon team as a product. So this is going to be our first one here, and of course we're going to go with the most iconic one, the Street Action Team, aka what was the Combiner team to make Perceptor, consisted of Highwire, Grindor, and Sureshock. Highwire, the little, I guess we'll call it a dirt bike. His Japanese name was Wheelie. We have Grindor. The first time we had and I think it's probably the only time, I'm trying to remember if there was another one. First time we had a skateboard transformer. Japanese name was Bank. And then we have Sureshock, the scooter transformer, which was oddly enough called RC in Japan. The combined mode in Japan was called Bumble. I guess a nod to Bumblebee, because when this character would appear in Super Link, aka Energon, they'd call him Cliff Jumper. A lot of fun uses of names across everything. So what could you tell me about this guy? There's a lot of stuff going on here. The individual robots, the combining, the choices of names. I mean, again, this is also an early Armada product.
Yep. So I'm going to take a half step back and just talk about the general idea around Minicons early anyway. We initially thought that the 3-packs would be how you got Minicons in the line, and that by buying the 3-packs you would kind of armor up or accentuate your
build your Armada.
Yep. And then we hit upon the idea, well, everybody should come with a partner Minicon, so that was fine. But those original couple of sets incorporated a combining element as a result to really armor up the bigger guys, and/or in this case, with the kids in the program, Carlos, Alexa, and
Rad,
the other kid, Rad. How could I forget Rad? How could they have partner robots? That's always an important aspect of any of these shows. How do robots talk to kids or humans at all? And what is the gateway to kids, for kids television, to meeting robots and then needing protection and all that. So Minicons gave us a different entryway you had kind of childlike or diminutive robots that could hang out with the kids in scale and kind of go with them on kid missions. So that was kind of a new important part that, other shows might not have had. The idea that they combined was an early idea, and I think they combined with almost those forms too. Takara had those in 2D, kind of 2D concept when we were going over different things, because we did the Requiem Blaster, the Boom Shield. Is that what's called? The
Sky Boom Shield, the Requiem Blaster, the Star Saber Sword,
and Star Saber and Perceptor here. We did all those at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So they were all planned at the same time.
Yes.
Interesting, because like the Requiem Blaster came much later in the line, so that's interesting that was already planned that early. Okay, cool.
So that's we wanted to turn 3 of the Minicons into a combining robot, and then that could be another type of protector for the kids as well. I think it's an interesting 3-pack. I'm always gonna be proud or have a smile about doing the first of any form. So, a first Vespa, a first scooter, a first BMX bike, there's a lot of weird things happening there. But, we are in the era, when I'm developing this in the early 2000s, that the X Games and Gravity Games and
That's true, yeah.
the Olympics taking on more summer game type things. These were latch-on points. Yeah. Yep, totally. Or Shaun White, huge at that time. So these are latch-on points that we are purposely putting into the line that reflect the overall cultural zeitgeist. Just like tuner cars we've talked about, this was another one. The active sports of that era, and that's how we got to do a BMX and a scooter and these different things, because it made sense in its time. And so we needed something friendly that kids could interact with, and that in itself was an interesting thing, because then you want to put that in animation, right? You want to have your kid riding the bike or the scooter or Then we had to do model sheets where the kids were all wearing helmets and appropriate safety gear, because you can't show kids not have that gear. Well, that gear doesn't have to be worn in Japan the same way it does here, and that got to be a bit tricky whenever we would have kids in the driver's seat. They'd have to have a seatbelt on and stuff like that. That might be a little bit in the weeds, but that's some of the stuff I remember about those products and characters and why we were doing them.
The choice of name Perceptor, again, the rumor is that it was a nod to Yoke-san.
Yeah, it was a favorite of mine and one of his creations. So that was just a great name that we wanted to. I just wanted to secure that one. So when I'm, talking about what names and stuff, I just liked that character when I was a kid. So I wanted to secure that name. That's how that's as likely as anything as how it got used.
Yeah, and because that trademark Perceptor up to that point had not been used since the original toy. So
could have easily been lost. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was a good catch. This mold again would be like any of those 3 packs, especially on the Japanese side of things. Repainted into like a million things. I'm not going to name them all, but there was CD packs, there was store exclusives, there was the Japanese variants, there was so many repaints of these. Again, those 3-pack Minicons saw a lot of action on the Japanese front. Amazingly enough, on this side, I think they only had one other repaint for this. It was done through the Universe line, and it was a very kind of bland kind of repaint that they did. But otherwise, again, very iconic 3-pack. A lot of people remember this one. And just a very good example of what Armada was trying to do with Minicons. And like you said, because it was an early one, you see that with the Star Saber Sword that also has a combining element. And, we'd have some of the other guys, the Destruction Minicon team that could be attached to Cyclonus and have the gear element be used. Like just those early Minicons that weren't just, it transforms into a vehicle, it transforms into a robot, and then it attaches to the robot and just activates a point. Those are the simple Minicons, but these ones here had an extra element to them that was something interesting to it. And again, combiner robot, Yeah. Also technically, Sureshock, which is a female Minicon character, technically being the first ever female member combiner up to that point in Transformers. So a lot of firsts here. Again, a lot of cool little stuff going on. Yeah, I think I'm
not even sure I knew that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure on that one because I don't think there's any others up to that point. Obviously, that would change later. But yeah, I think she was the first. Yeah, because I know later on too, especially the first ever all-female combiner would come from the Energon mold of this. So a lot of unique ideas here. But yeah, love it. It's pretty cool. We'll move on to the next one. We were talking about the Star Saber Sword. Let's talk about role play items. So we had the Laserbeak price point, which looked like a deluxe class price point, packaging, the bubble, and everything like that, but just slightly larger. And when you rung it up at your Toys R Us or Walmart back then, it was clearly a couple bucks more expensive. That was the role play price point. And outside of Laserbeak, there was 2 other items that were in this role play price point. It was the Star Saber and the Dark Saber. Both shared the same mold, just painted accordingly to match their colors, which was a role play item of the Star Saber Minicon Combiner team. Slightly larger, has a gimmick where you push down and it swoops up 2 little translucent pieces of plastic to make it look like it's glowing with power. It had electronic sound effects where if you swung it around, it made a whooshing sound, which I'm pretty sure you guys probably got some of that tooling and concepting from Star Wars lightsabers up to that point, which did pretty much the same thing at the time. Tell me everything about these guys.
So this gets into that big push of why I was the right guy at the time to try to do some things. So role play is a huge part of any toy line, certainly in the late 90s and early 2000s. Role play is any item that a kid can wear or pick up or use to replicate being the hero from the shows. So you often see that in the form of a lightsaber, a Darth Vader mask, a Boba Fett mask, Iron Man gauntlets, Hulk hands.
Batman had tons of that too, grappling hooks.
The belt going all the way back to the 90s,
yeah.
The utility belt, perfect example. There were bat clubs that had the fan shooters and stuff. Even in some cases, Nerf items can get into role play. when they get licensed and things, right? So roleplay is a big category, whether it's masks or weapons or gear, in every line. It's another part of the segmentation that you hope to have alongside action figures or vehicles. You hope to have some sort of roleplay component. Because if a kid really loves these characters, they want to become Spider-Man. They want to become Captain America and have his shield, right? So going back to the old 80s model or the classic idea of what Transformers was, there was just not a lot of room for roleplay.
Nothing.
You could make the case that Megatron and Soundwave and the Boombox are the original roleplay. Mm-hmm. You might be able to make that case. Because you're actually carrying the item that technically would have been in the show, right? But traditionally, it didn't have that kind of out-of-bounds kind of thing we would call roleplay today. And with all due respect to the helmet, backpack, shield, sword thing that came out in the 80s.
Yeah, that's the one I was going to mention. That's
more like a costume. Yeah.
Well, yeah, up to that point, the only kind of elements that existed was like a Collegeville, if anyone knows what those are from the 70s and the 80s, the Collegeville Halloween costumes, and then of course, like you mentioned, that costume helmet thing. That was about as close as it got, but really Transformers didn't really dabble in role play up until when you pretty much started with Armada, and then look how it is today. Imagine.
Yeah. So roleplay is a big component to all these other toy lines. It's a big component to Hasbro. It's a big component of adding items to your brand to gain more shelf space, to gain, more dollars, and, at the end of the day. So not having roleplay was a problem. Because if we are saying these things are important in all these other lines, when we're selling these things in, it's easy for them to go, well, if Transformers is so important, why doesn't it have roleplay? Why the heck should I buy this Fantastic Four roleplay? And so we had to figure that out. Another thing roleplay did at the time was that was an item that Hasbro could create and manufacture without Takara's connection. Those were items that the kids didn't play the same way in Japan with roleplay as the American kids. Different safety standards, different levels of realism expected, different levels of feature expected in those two markets. So that was not anything we talked about doing roleplay for Transformers was not usually something that was going to work with Takara's needs at all, just the way their market worked. So that meant it was an item that Hasbro could manufacture in its Hong Kong facilities and kind of control volume and dedicate to different market partners. Hey, we'll give you this roleplay item. What do you think? ... So it was a way for us to protect some categories that we otherwise wouldn't do with Takara. Also, how we picked the role playing. I mean, the Star Saber was a cool item. We made it to be an important feature in the show. Mm-hmm. The Minicon had sold well, so we based it off that style. We based the negative one on the redeco of the Star Saber item. So there was some continuity there as far as visual colors and things. And very simply, I gave this project to a gentleman that I've mentioned before, Ham Woodhouse, who was a role-play specialist, did a lot of lightsabers, and the original Talking Darth Vader, the original Talking Optimus helmets. And he knocked these out pretty quick. We weren't asking for a lot. Like you said, it was a pretty simple feature. Get some movement in there, get some light up, some sound effects. And
it sounds like it's stuff that he's worked with. You mentioned he worked with lightsabers, and this is like anyone who's messed with this toy and messed with any of like the way the lightsaber toys are, where they have some kind of motion sensor. Oh, you're swinging it around, and the toy recognizes that and does a sound effect to match that.
Yeah, so that's very much from that tradition, and so he knocked those out, and that's why they look a little different. They're Hasbro made, and we did make them somewhat fast, so there's only so much detailing on them and deco, but they let us test out the roleplay theory within a show that was doing well under the Transformers heading. So I would call them a learning type item. I think they did okay for the volume we actually made. So it was fine. That item was fine.
Well, it really opened up the can of worms that would be role-play items for Transformers later. Energon the year after that would have role-play items also, the sword that came with Megatron and the blaster that came with Optimus Prime. And then, of course, just to fast forward, by the time we get to 2007 with the movie stuff, it's the renaissance of that, where there's it all really started with this little Star Saber and Dark Saber. Because, like we mentioned before, there was no role-play items at Robots in Disguise. There wasn't any in Beast Machines. There wasn't any in Beast Wars, which is shocking considering how popular that brand was.
Well, that was part of the disappointment of Laserbeak not working because of the shift we had to make with the colors, because that was meant to be the push role-play item for the brand. A character that transforms that also helps and can scan and do different things and talks to Optimus and so on and so forth. That was really the one that was keyed up to really prove this idea out. And when it fell flat, we kind of scrambled a little bit, and we just ended up with classic swords. So it's still a shame to me those colors shifted for yet another reason. Yeah,
but at least it gave birth to something that, we can't imagine today Transformers without role-play items. Like, literally... Fans are, as of this recording, fans are speculating on Transformers Rise of the Beast movie product, and there's role-play items that are, showing up that are related to this brand. So it's something that back then didn't exist, but today it's all over the brand, and it all really starts here. So that's a nice little note, and that's why I kind of wanted to talk about these, because they serve a very important part in Transformers' history. And what again, it's would you say that was also part of Brian's initiative, Brian Goldner, to kind of really widen the brand?
Sure, that's all part of it. So again, going from a brand that's just selling action figures and then some licensing,
because he came from Power Rangers, which had tons
action
of that.
Figures, role play, young kid stuff, collector stuff, across the board, licensing. Role play being that forcing us to consider role play as an item we will be doing, versus what had traditionally in the previous teams just been skipped over. Oh, we don't do that, kind of attitude. Was definitely something that I was tasked with, bringing to the party, and the change that was coming. Definitely.
And the last one we're going to cover here today, we're going to talk about Transformers Armada Overload with his Minicon partner rollout. Overload was what we always call like the upgrade element in Transformers, something that traditionally started with Master Force, aka Power Master Optimus Prime, where within a show, and it started on the Japanese side of things, very Japanese kind of writing style, where you'd have your leader character, and then halfway through the series, some kind of element would come along to be a combiner element to add to that leader. It started with Master Force. Victory would have that too with Star Saber and Victory Leo. We'd go on. And then, of course, with Armada returning to that kind of storytelling, and it would continue with Energon and Cybertron. Having, in this case, we had two of them. We had Jetfire before that, which we'll talk about in a future episode. But today we're going to talk about Overload, a extra element on top of Jetfire, which I don't think we've done that since. I'm trying to remember another example. Maybe a little bit with Leo Breaker and Wing Saber, I guess, but not really together per se.
The one I think of and was somewhat of an inspiration was Captain Shark with Train on his shoulder and something else on the other shoulder.
That's why, because you had Master Force and Victory with Transformers that did that. Then when Takara steered away from Transformers for a bit, the Brave stuff continued that. That storytelling where you have your leader character, and then halfway through, hey, he's going to get his, we call the term the magic mushroom, just to expand or grow or combine with something. And so Overload was jump into this one, and then we'll get into some of the other stuff.
I think I inadvertently hit upon it right there. This is such a Japanese item, it hurts.
Oh yeah, okay? 100%. That's where the idea spawned from.
Yeah, so this item was purposely needed from Takara for the Summer Golden Week.
Okay.
This was a big deal debut item that then they could promote with the Optimus and all of that, how that promotion is done within the Japanese country markets. They make a big deal out of certain launches, and Golden Week is their, I don't know how you describe it, but kind of their Christmas meets Halloween. Everybody gets a bunch of gifts and enjoys the week and all kinds of stuff. So
what Golden Week in Japan is, it happens, I believe it's late April until early May, and it's the reason why it's a big deal because multiple holidays in Japan happen that same week. Like I forget what the holiday, but it's like it's Showa Day, which is their emperor. But then there's also Children's Day. There's the Constitutional Memorial Day. I know I'm forgetting another one, but there's like a whole bunch of holidays that happen all in that week.
So like the whole country takes off.
Yeah, it just becomes this like, again, they call it the Golden Week because it's like, oh, look at all these holidays. It's kind of, I guess, to make an equivalency for us, it's imagine if you had Christmas, Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day, like if it was all in a week, you'd be like, whoa, that's a crazy week, So yeah.
So this
context.
Yeah. So this was an item they wanted to promote during that time. I guess they promote items, during that time to debut, and I guess probably auspicious to do so. Mm-hmm. And it needed to fit that Japanese kind of communication, right? This is a combining item. It upgrades the leader. It brings big guns, that kind of communication that is in all those types of shows, right? Mm-hmm. So they came to us and they said, we really need this item. We really like you to participate and partner. Because there were conversations still, even though we were doing co-development, about there may be times where we have to just go on our own with the full tooling if there's an item that we really want, like for instance the roleplay item we just talked about. Mm-hmm. Takara wasn't really going to kick in for tooling on that item if it was something they clearly didn't want.
And to my knowledge, I believe the Star Saber Sword, the roleplay one specifically, didn't have a Japanese release, to my knowledge.
Probably not.
Yeah.
So there were times where that was acceptable, but we're talking about a big item that they hoped to put in the show, and they knew that the American market did not need any of that extra kind of stuff there, So I haven't even talked about the toy yet because this item got created because of a need before you even designed the toy, right? So it had to be a partner to Optimus. It had to be combining. That was about all you knew. So they went ahead and developed a model, kind of a block form model of what they needed to make all that combining work. Obviously, they had to do all that hard work before we could even attempt to veneer it or style it in any way whatsoever. So they did a lot of pre-work when they presented it to us, and they were like, "We really like you to participate in this tooling, even though it's not something that you'd traditionally be in, but." Please remember we've also participated in some pickup trucks and some Jeeps and some, things that don't make sense in their market either. And so I was like, okay, we'll do it. A little. I mean, and that's what partnership should do, right?
You give them a pickup truck, they shoot back with a bullet train.
Yeah, exactly. And so we said, okay, well, we could figure this out, and we'll make the most of it. But to make that type of combining item at the scale they wanted to make it meant that it didn't have a lot of deco left over. And if there's any crime of that item, before we even talk about the individual item, is that it just is a big red brick kind of in the package. And because
I will always say
because of the trailer nature of it and everything, it you don't know what it is. And
about this toy, I always say it is the shining example of how Transformer toys look amazing in their resin prototype gray. All the details pop.
Primer gray. Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Like when the prototype of this, when it got out and in the resin gray, I think it was from a Figure King magazine back in the day or something. everyone's like, this is the most amazing looking Transformer ever. Just, standing there, we didn't know the articulation. We didn't know, what it was supposed to do. But in that prototype, great, it looked fantastic, and I'll obviously put it on the screen for people to see that prototype, because I always keep that image because it's such a great example of how stuff like how gray as a color just shows all the detail, and then you make it in red that washes it all away.
I never saw a bad gray prototype. How about that?
Yeah, there you go.
They all look good in gray in the primer, and I would approve many of robots that over the years I look back and I go, how did that happen? And it's like, well, that color and that mold. And
would you say red as a color?
The edges.
Would you say red as a color washes out detail? Like, what's the biggest offender? Like, what's the color that really gets rid of detail? Would you say?
Black and red are pretty bad.
Black. I imagine.
Black, because you can't get shadows to differentiate shapes as much, and red kind of pops back at you so much that you also have the same effect.
Especially in photography.
It would have been better maybe in a I don't know. We didn't have paint really. We didn't have a lot of paint, so no matter what color we chose, it would have been a dominant thing in the box. Let's talk about the item a little bit.
Well, supposedly this figure had a lot of unpaintable plastics on him. Probably be part of that combiner element to use that kind of the POM plastic.
That doesn't surprise me. It had the POM and probably polypropylene.
Yeah, so having to use that plastic to, I guess, for the rigidness of being a combiner element figure also led to the fact that if you did want to add details on this, you couldn't. You couldn't, you just had to work with the plastic that was molded in there. As a result,
we covered it with detail.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's one of the more richly designed kind of characters from that era. This is a completely Eric Siebenahler item.
Okay, cool.
He took their brick image and veneered it completely. This is one of his square-jawed robots. What is it? You'll start to see in these conversations, especially
the early genesis of this.
The square of the jaw, almost guaranteed that it is an Eric item. If it's a pointy jaw with goggles, it's more leaning towards me. But I digress. So he did this one. I remember working with him on the color, and I guess we're gonna have to make it red, because at that time we had two Optimus redecos, two Jetfire redecos, and this guy was coming in, at least might have been coming in with one of those Jetfire redecos. So we had to use a color that would be harmonious to the whole opportunity, right? So red was the one that was the consistent through color, so to speak. And then he's got the biggest Minicon.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So he's got we used to call that one the real Maxicon. We used to call the price point.
Yeah. What was interesting also about him is because he was a shuttle tow, like you could put Jetfire on him and he kind of towed him like a shuttle carrier. So you had that kind of play pattern element. You could remove the rollout Minicon, and Optimus Prime could tow that trailer on top of it also.
Yep.
So it had that element, which was also interesting. It is, and to this day, I can't confirm, but I'm pretty sure it is the first time we've had a Transformer toy that had a sound gimmick up to that point that made the transforming sound. I think up to that point, we had not had a Transformer that had done that. We've had Transformers that made crunching noises or something like that, but never that traditional, however you want to. Everyone has their own way of making it with their mouths, but so he was the first. It was the first figure to actually have that, where when you put the rollout Minicon into that chest cavity, that sound effect would happen. It also is kind of a headmaster kind of element. It's a little bit of a power master kind of element. There's a lot of stuff going on with this figure, and again with the combining element, it's a bit of a parts former because it comes apart.
Well, even the Deluxe Prime can pull that thing.
Yep.
And
exactly.
it connects to the trailer of the big Optimus, like it could be a big train.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff going on here with that, spring-loaded missiles, all kinds of fun little things. And like you said, it has the largest Minicon on top of it all. So it's this nice product here. And oddly enough, again, to get into trademarks for a second, his name Overload, that Overload trademark was a Hasbro trademark that goes all the way back to 1990s. Again, Micromasters. So the Minicons with a Micromaster connection there. And Overload, if you look what Micromaster Overload was back in the 1990s, he was this very Optimus, Ultra Magnus looking kind of trailer kind of thing. So if coincidence or not, whoever decided on the name and everything, just worked out in the end, because his Japanese name is Ultra Magnus. They leaned on that heavily.
It could very easily have been like, I was looking through those books and said, "Oh, that looks a lot like this guy. Oh, okay, let's go with this name. See
it just worked
see
out.
If that works."
Yeah,
it could have easily been that.
And this mold found its way across. Like it got a whole bunch of repaints in Japan. It became a Costco exclusive within multi packs and stuff like that too. It would get a yellow treatment with Costco and Energon. Mm-hmm. It would get a blue treatment also in Energon, being called Ultra Magnus. It would get a Lucky Draw treatment in Japan, which I believe there was only 100 units of that one in blue. So like you guys
got
put
the TFCC.
Yeah, well, that's much later on. It got retooled into a Transformer Collector Club exclusive. Fantastic mold, in my opinion. Obviously, it's blocky. In a lot of ways,
it's very blocky.
It kind of represents a lot of what some fans would say was the negative of Transformers Armada, which was a very blocky kind of aesthetic. But what it did in terms of play value, and just all the things that it does and cross-pollinates with all the different play value that could be done with this, with your smaller price points, your larger price points, combining the Minicon element, sound effects, lights. There's a lot going on there that, for a child, we tend to forget, as hardcore collectors, but a child would love this because there's so much going on there, and that's really fun.
Yeah.
There was here, so we have, again, it's always the rumors. According to designer Aaron Archer, he posted this on the TFW 2005 forums as Orson. Any Ultra Magnus influences on Overlord was Takara's doing. Hasbro was responsible for the head and surface details. Archer personally wasn't interested in revisiting Magnus, as he had already done that within the Robots in Disguise series, the one previously, 2001.
Yeah.
So that's the rumor online, according to a post a while back.
Yeah, that's mostly accurate. I mean, we didn't have anything to do with the combining or any of that. Part of that plan. So, what was the last part of that?
The last part of it was just you weren't interested in revisiting the Ultra Magnus character.
Yeah, there was at the time we were so trying to rebuild this brand in a modern way, to get to this movies and everything else. We were really conscious of trying not to overdo primes at that point, and not taking any leadership away from Optimus. Mm-hmm. So Ultra Magnus and kind of his story at that time was a little, a little risky, because even at the time, we're going to reissue G1 Optimus or G1 Ultra Magnus. It's G1 Optimus in white. You know what I mean? True. So we were trying to not confuse the issue at that time. So that's why Ultra Magnus was kind of downplayed at the time.
Like you said, because you have a commemorative figure that's coming out soon that's going to have that trademark anyways, there's no point in, the part we've discussed this in the past, but also sometimes names are decided just because Hasbro goes, hey, we got to use it, So if they already have Ultra Magnus on this one item, might as well just have a new trademark on this item that we're going to use also indefinitely for a while. The Overload trademark, I believe, would survive until like 2009 or something, so they'd get a good almost 10 years out of it. So it's something where, how I see it is, it was a great product. I know when I picked it up back in the day, obviously the red was very strong and washed out a lot of those details that we were excited about. But otherwise, it's a great product, and again, it has a lot of stuff going on with it that we'd see for many years to come with the Transformers brand. It started that Japanese combiner element that we would see again with Energon, with Cybertron, and then would find its way, even when you look at it, what is Revenge of the Fallen with Jetfire and Optimus?
Yeah.
Like
it's one of the most tangible examples of the Takara influence on the Western market in the co-development era.
Yeah,
I think that's probably the best example or way to say it. Is those combiner type featured items.
And hopefully, there's been a lot of talk within Hasbro today of bringing back a lot of those Armada characters into the modern era, and some of those we're starting to see now. We're starting to see like the Starscream we recently saw, but there's rumors of others, and there's a rumor of, we've seen the prototypes of an Armada Optimus Prime in some shape or form being made into the modern era. Possibly this character too, because if it's always like that. You remake one of them, and the other two can't be too far behind. In the case of Jetfire and Overload,
gives you more reason. Yeah.
So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the future with that. And anything else you want to cover on this guy before we wrap it up?
No, this was good to cover off some of the deeper stuff that happens with redecos and role play and co-development and things. That this kind of gets into the more bones of toy development.
Yeah, we're gonna be doing a lot more of these because it seems you fans, you really, really like when we just take a single character or a single product and try to really break down what's going on here, why the decisions were made, and then of course after that product is put out, the effects of that product in the long term, be it repaints or choices that are done because of that product. It's always very interesting to kind of dive into that stuff because just like everything we talked about today, all of these in some shape or form, with the Nemesis Prime black repaints, with the Perceptor, Minicons and small combiners and even female characters, role play items with the Star Saber, and of course large, Golden Week, aka Christmas combiner items in Overload, all very important aspects of both the brand and the business side of it too. So pretty cool stuff. So, Aaron, again, thank you for having us today to talk about more Transformers Armada and toys in general.
Always a good time.
All righty. So this is the Toy Armada with Aaron Archer, and I'm your host, Protoman, and we're going to dive into more stuff in the near future, and I hope you'll be there with us.